Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. December 11th, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. ECW Massacre on 34th Street Review, WWF Rebellion, more. By Dave Meltzer. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Amidst rumors of the company being down for the count, Extreme Championship Wrestling put on a strong pay-per-view show on December 3rd, but more importantly, everyone was paid for one pay period, meaning everyone is now 5 weeks behind in pay. Nobody quit the promotion, which some had talked about doing if they weren't paid again. The morale, which rises and falls based on whether or not the checks come, was said to be better coming out of the show. This was partially due to what most considered a strong show, as well as Paul Heyman telling the wrestlers after the show about 3 shows in January, including a January 7th pay-per-view date at the same Hammerstein Ballroom, which he is looking at making the home base of the company, and 2 sold shows to local promoters on January 12th in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and January 13th in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. There were plenty of stories circulating in wrestling that the Massacre on 34th Street would be the company's last pay-per-view show, and that the company would be out of business at the end of the year. Heyman has stated that he was going to hang on in some form, whether the company would have to be scaled back, waiting for a break. Heyman himself, and he isn't the only person, feels that next year could be an opening because of the uncertainty in WCW. If Eric Bischoff buys WCW, and strong negotiations for that were going on during the week, it would be without the economic resources of Time Warner to pick up the huge losses, and the company, which plans on running few if any house shows for several months while rebuilding, would have very little revenue coming in to offset the huge contracts and other outside expenses. From the outside, it's an economic model that doesn't make sense in the short run, but is based upon creating a new big increase in popularity to hit in the long run. Bischoff can point to his track record of taking a $30 million a year company and turning it into a $200+ million a year company, and taking a company that had never been profitable into being highly profitable. His detractors can equally point out taking a company that was losing $6 million annually, getting 2 very strong years, and leaving it in the position where losses are projected to be $60 million for this year after much budget cutting. Those close to the situation seem to feel very strongly a deal will be put together this time, and likely by the end of the year, but that is no different from the feeling every time a deal is negotiated, and Bischoff has been in the hunt for months, with the deal seemingly being close to done before apparently falling apart. Vince McMahon's deal was seemingly close, and it fell apart as well. Backstage at the December 4th TV tapings, people were openly talking about it as if it was a done deal, and those who were close to Bischoff were strutting around a lot more confidently than they had done in the past. At press time, the deal has not been completed, and those close to Bischoff say he's very confident. He himself has a non-disclosure clause in the negotiations, so is keeping things quiet, but he is confident a deal would be made several times in the past, and ultimate WCW has backed off or slowed down negotiations each time. What little is known is that Bischoff is planning on cutting the schedule down to 5 shows per month, at least over the short term, a pay-per-view at a major arena, and 4 TV tapings of the current variety, taping Nitro and Thunder in succession on Monday nights, somewhat similar to what the company is doing, although the company is running 2 or 3 house shows per month along with the 5 TV dates. Instead of touring, the idea is to move Nitro to a set location, with Las Vegas being the most likely spot. At press time, there has not even been any scouting of potential sites, let alone negotiations for those sites and the ability to clear them 52 Mondays per year. In talks regarding Las Vegas, the preliminary idea would be at the Orleans Hotel in their small arena that sometimes holds boxing matches. The negative is that it is off the strip, thus making it harder to attract tourists, which most of the marketing would be aimed at, and that the building, which holds less than 2,000 people, doesn't look like a major venue on television. The key is whether or not tourists will weekly want to spend one of their nights of vacation on WCW Nitro. If the product is hot, this will work. If the product isn't hot, there are so many hot entertainment options in Las Vegas that the competition from big-name acts will kill it with tourists, and the current product isn't strong at maintaining a paying live fan base for quarterly shows in any market, let alone weekly lengthy shows. AWA, in its dying days, ran about every 5 or 6 weeks at the Showboat Hotel, which held about 2,800, for TV, and in early stages, was able to pack the building and tape some legendary matches, along with much more that was far from legendary. As the years went on, the crowds dwindled. The AWA never marketed to tourists, and the live crowd it did draw was almost exclusively locals. When WWF has run Las Vegas, the crowd was almost exclusively locals as well. WCW did draw a lot of out-of-towners when they were hot for Halloween Havoc shows. If the AWA would have taped those shows weekly, it would have been dead within a few months. With today's pacing, unless they are a hot enough product to draw tourists, even booking a 2,000-seat venue, they'll be dead without giveaways within a few weeks, and unless the building acoustics are strong, even if they pack the place, after a few times in the same building, the crowd reactions will be down. The upside is that WCW can at the beginning pack a small building, and small building atmosphere is clearly preferable to empty larger buildings. Exactly where Bischoff's money is coming from is unclear. Columbia TriStar has been mentioned in some reports, but there is no confirmation of that, and in fact, denials. There is also a history of denials on this subject as it pertains to negotiations and points in negotiations of items that history has shown were accurate. Bischoff's ideas to reinvent wrestling have been privately talked about, stemming from the Battledome show, with the idea of taking a group of individuals with a good cosmetic look and physique, training them to be superstar wrestlers, instead of taking trained wrestlers and attempting to give them the look. Many have already complained that 80s cosmetic superhero thing is out the window, noting that copying the Battledome look for pro wrestlers would make far more sense if Battledome was a hit show today and capturing an audience that pro wrestling was losing, which it isn't. In the late 80s and early 90s, a similar concept, American Gladiators, was a big TV hit in syndication, far bigger than Battledome today, and with the general public. And during wrestling's decline in popularity in the mid-90s, there could be an argument made that the more cosmetic-looking gladiators, with their ability to take steroids during a period where WCW didn't have its act together and McMahon was pressured into legitimately drug testing, were capturing the lost wrestling audience during a major decline period for the industry. One point in Bischoff's favor in going for look over ability is that at no point in history have wrestling fans reacted less to quality wrestling, and even death-defying wrestling inside the ring. It is back to an audience that has been trained into seeing stars, as even with the ECW pay-per-view show could matches, and even in one case an excellent match that went too long, died to the live crowd. However, one of the big problems with the industry currently is the mentality of the big blonde muscle guy equals box office, so let's fill our rosters with them. That, like overloading most concepts in wrestling, guarantees the concept won't work. What gets over is the unique. One superstar Billy Graham in 1977 in Magic at the box office. An entire card of them is actually a bad wrestling show. Ditto Hulk Hogan in 1987. Steve Austin in 1998 would be different in that his work rate was such that an entire card of Steve Austin's would be a great show, but it would also guarantee that Austin himself wouldn't have gotten over the way he did. During Bischoff's success period, it was the divergence of the show that made it strong. Big-name stars with years of television that were in a gimmick that hadn't worn out its welcome on top drew the fans, while the undercard guys put on a great show and made the money seem well spent. The big stars stayed, but when the undercard guys started fading out and the good matches disappeared, those same Hogans and Nashes and Stings couldn't draw squat either at the box office or in the ratings, and the pay-per-view business literally declined 80 to 90% because everyone has their window of drawing power, and when it closes, it's closed. Ultimately, the public saw the product as redundant with bad main events and no quality wrestling on the undercards. Not elevating people because they didn't have star power in their past, because they didn't have lengthy pasts, of course killed the future of the company. The ascension of the WWF and creation of new stars sped that decline, but much of WCW's failure was its own doing and not a product of the WWF increasing the quality of its own product, because WWF always drew a younger audience and WCW lost its older audience base that would have been loyal had it not been constantly insulted and given a product it didn't want to see. And while people have blamed Bischoff's problems on the salary structure, and no doubt that was a huge problem over the past year, even if you took all those big money contracts out, you'd still have a company losing $30 million or more this year. The problem is first and most prominently, lack of revenue coming in. The problem is the poor live gates and the poor pay-per-view buy rates. That's actually problem number one, and poor TV ratings, which creates lack of interest in advertising and merchandising. The salary structure is a huge problem, but only because of the first problems. WCW was hugely profitable just 2 years ago with the same inflated salaries. In hindsight, when he was on top, Bischoff badly lacked foresight and didn't listen to warnings, since it was hardly a secret when WCW was on top of what their future outlook appeared to be. The only surprise was that the decline happened so quickly, but that was also unforeseen how the product would be such a disaster on so many levels. How this relates to ECW is that there will be more buildings available and less house show product of wrestling touring in 2001, at least for the first few months of the year. Less product creates a demand, and ECW may be able to go to a lot of markets that don't get WWF once per year as the only major league show in town. That would still require strong television, because without a TV deal that funds the company enough to remain solvent, any openings potentially are nothing but potential. Heyman himself was mad over the situation, with Steve Corino being unhappy at missing recent checks, claiming he's the one wrestler in the company who has no right to complain to him. Heyman's claim is because on April 30, 1999, Corino signed a 5-year contract with ECW. The contract guaranteed him $150 per show through July 30, 1999, then $200 per show through July 30, 2000, $300 per show from July 31, 2000 through July 30, 2001, and $400 per show from July 31, 2001 through April 30, 2004. Just a few months after signing the contract, because he was coming along so well and also in the process of going through a divorce, Heyman bumped Corino's pay up to $1,000 per week and has since given him a second raise to $1,500 per week. Even if he was behind on pay, he's a year ahead of what is in his contract and he has nothing to gripe about, Heyman said. He shouldn't have bought a brand new house and a $35,000 car. The fact of the matter is that if anyone has anything to complain about here, Steve Corino is not one of these people. He's perhaps the only wrestler in this crew whose contract, if you read it, he's way ahead of his contract and has nothing to gripe about. He's making $1,500 a week when I could be paying him $300 per night and he'd have nothing to say about it. At the time I gave him the deal, it was a great deal for him. I'm the guy who gave him the opportunity to get over to this extent where he could make that kind of money. It's obvious to me our payroll is inflated, he continued. We paid these guys because we were going on TNN and we couldn't afford to have the entire dressing room raided by WWF and WCW trying to stop us from getting any momentum on TNN, which we never got to begin with because of TNN. It's a real sore spot with me because here's a guy I've really taken care of. He's broke from not living within his means. He has nothing to be upset about. Tension between Heyman and some of the other wrestlers got strong over the past week due to the aftermath of the Texas cancellations, and that some of the wrestlers were upset Heyman blamed the wrestlers for the problems. 4 wrestlers had taken an independent booking on December 7th in Fort Worth for the small XSE promotion in the same metropolitan area as the ECW scheduled and later canceled show the next night in Dallas at the Bronco Bowl. When ECW canceled the Texas tour, the XSE promotion, which couldn't afford to fly the 4 wrestlers out, canceled their bookings and issued a press release claiming they had nothing to do with the ECW cancellation. The wrestlers, Sandman, Corino, Whipwreck and Tajiri, themselves never had the right to take that booking for one, Heyman said. It should be noted that ECW wrestlers, particularly of late, were almost all in the market for as many indie dates as possible due to uncertainty with their ECW paycheck, and also because, with the exception of 1 or 2 promoters that Heyman had problems with, ECW wrestlers had never in the past been prevented from taking indie bookings on their nights off. There is a point that this show was outside the usual area ECW promotes and was in the same metro area the day before an ECW show, and they were counting on ECW to pick up the trans for them to take the booking. I think it's imbecilic of them to take a booking in direct competition to our own show the next night. It was beyond stupid for them to assume ECW would pick up the trans for that show. That's just bad business for us to pick up the trans for an indie that's in direct competition to our own show 10 minutes away the very next day. Heyman said he gave Lynn his highest recommendation to Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard and Jim Ross, as well as to Terry Taylor in WCW, and talked with Pritchard directly on November 28 while Lynn was backstage at the WWF SmackDown tapings at the Target Center in Minneapolis and meeting with Ross about a possible job. It is believed that Ross told Lynn to send a videotape in of his work so the writing staff can make a decision of what, if anything, to do with him. The response was such that Lynn is now looking into his options in Japan, particularly eyeing Pro Wrestling Noah. However, on the pay-per-view, they were pushing the idea that Lynn was staying, including continuing his storyline he'll turn under Don Callis. Jerry's here for as long as he wants to be here, Heyman said. We taped vignettes, with Callis and Lynn as heels taped after the pay-per-view, that went very well. We're trying to make him a Bret Hart heel. A 37-year-old guy in an industry where he's not appreciated. Some in ECW are also saying that at the pay-per-view, Rob Van Dam's thought to be the key wrestler in the company for most of this year, had his hand played out. They noted that while fans chanted for Sandman, who wasn't scheduled in a match, nobody chanted for Van Dam, nor were any number of posters there for him, and nor was there a lot of talk about him in the crowd. ECW once again failed to talk about Van Dam on the show. Van Dam, who is owed money and has the highest contract in the company, may be the one more than any others that the company may not be able to afford. Heyman, who said he doesn't know Van Dam's status with the company or if he'll come back, offered everyone in the locker room a full release to go elsewhere, without having to file for a breach and wait the 90 days Heyman has in the contracts, depending upon the contract, with his wrestlers where he has to either make good on what is owed or it's a breach. At press time, nobody had taken it. Heyman added that the financial situation remains precarious and that he'll only book shows if it is guaranteed he won't lose money on the show, so the schedule will likely remain cut way back at this point. Heyman said that Scott Anton, who was looking to get a spot back with WCW this past week, never had an ECW contract. In the backdrop of all this commotion was the pay-per-view before a sellout 2,600 fans, paying nearly $160,000 at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York. The positives is that everyone up and down the show worked very hard. There was less undercard nonsensical angles that have bogged down previous pay-per-view shows. There was nothing on the show that even resembled what could be called a bad match. The negative was it was a very strange crowd, very Nassau Coliseum-like. They weren't into the wrestling, even when it was good. They were into the show as a whole, but died during the longer matches and from a TV viewer standpoint, totally killed a basically well-worked main event. The main event was the saddest part of the show as all three wrestlers worked very hard for the company's heavyweight title, to almost no crowd reaction, made sadder by all the attempts to get some that failed. Clearly, the tweener personalities of all three, credible as a heel, but being from New York, crowd didn't really boo him, currently led to no strong reactions. The belt, which was killed in August by the Mike Awesome and Taz fiasco, doesn't mean anything and it's hard to build to a big match when the big prize is dead. The biggest reactions for the match were chants for Sandman, and the crowd cared far more about Sandman's run-in at the end than they did about who would win the main event they had supposedly paid to see for the main belt in the company. According to live sources, the crowd heat was killed because of so much brawling in the crowd and on the balcony. Whenever the wrestlers were even on the side of things, about 1/3 of the crowd couldn't even see what was happening. The problem with the main event getting no heat was that not only did they follow Yoshihiro Tajiri and Super Crazy, who are amazing workers, especially with each other, and then went long, followed by a main event that went even longer and a Tommy Dreamer match which also had good effort but went too long, but the lack of the crowd caring about the main eventers. Lynn got the closest thing to heel heat with the tepid and idiotic "you sold out" chants. The ringside crowd was far more into Francine, who some said was stealing heat from the match, although there was none to steal. At one point late on December 1st, it appeared Hall would do the show, most likely doing a run-in during the final match, causing Credible to lose. By the next morning, the deal had fallen through. It didn't fall through because of Hall's latest arrest, as it hadn't happened yet. Strangely, on the Time Warner cable system advertising for the show, Hall's name was listed. Heyman blamed it on Hall's name being in an Entertainment Weekly deal and Time Warner picking up names from that piece. Heyman said due to what has happened with Hall in the past 2 weeks, he won't use him. Heyman also said he was considering surprising everyone with Easy Money in the mystery partner of Crazy Spot, figuring whomever was in that spot would get a big boost out of being part of what he expected to be the match to steal the show. And yes, the sign in the second row in front of the hard camera about Paul E. not paying was confiscated early in the show. Show opened with Corino trying to get over as a heel by running down Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales. Joey Styles and Joel Gertner opened, with Gertner still selling his arm from Anderson's armbar on the TV show. This should have been explained better because a large percentage of the pay-per-view audience nowadays doesn't get syndication and had no idea why his arm was in a sling. But at least this company is the last one that actually sells beatings. In the 2 dark matches, taped to give the company some TV product for the next few weeks while there are no house shows, New Jack beat Angel in the same brawl, although New Jack physically is in really rough shape from all the injuries and it was said to be really bad, and HC Lock pinned Danny Daniels in a battle of referees. 1. Christian York, Jason Spence, and Joey Matthews, Adam Birch, defeated Simon Diamond, Pat Kenny, and Swinger, Joe Dorgan, in 5:38 of a rematch from the last pay-per-view. Dawn Marie, who is actually Kenny's real-life fiancée, came out and said she needed 2 men and would give herself to whichever team won. York and Matthews teased looking up her dress from behind. Diamond did the Cool Simon series, a Northern Lights suplex followed by a vertical suplex and a gourd buster. Matthews did a tope on Swinger and York did a springboard plancha on both. York pinned Swinger with an elbow off the top rope called the Rebel Yell. After the bout, Dawn Marie turned on York and Matthews and went with Diamond and Swinger. They did an angle where Matthews injured his arm, and Gertner, for some unexplained reason, was so concerned, he left the broadcast booth, which allowed Cyrus to come in. At least it was different than the monthly attack on Gertner, but even less logical. 1 3/4 stars. 2. Easy Money, Jason Broyles, Pinballs Mahoney, John Reschner, in 7:52. At one point Money pulled down his trunks all the way, revealing a G-string. That wasn't the slightest bit fun. Money, who is one of the most underrated workers in the business, hit a high plancha. Julio De Niro and Chris Hamrick continually interfered. Mahoney, whose knees are shot from doing so many top rope moves, well over 300 pounds, did himself no more favors doing a plancha to the floor. Money blocked a sunset flip and turned it into a short power bomb, which they called the Money in the Bank, which is one of those really lame names for a new move that'll guarantee no matter how cool it is, it'll never get over. Match ended with De Niro doing a form of a neck breaker off the top rope, followed by Hamrick leaping off Money's shoulders with a very high leg drop and then Money finishing him with a moonsault. They continued a 3-on-1 until Nova made the save. 2.25 stars. 3. Nova, Mike Bucci, pinned De Niro, Brian Vall, in 5:57. Hamrick and Money kept interfering. Hamrick did a springboard dropkick so high that he actually was too high for Nova's head. De Niro did his vertebreaker, which is a much better name for a new cool move. Nova did the kryptonite crunch on Elektra to lay her out. Money and Hamrick did a double-team wheelbarrow German suplex on Nova. Mahoney got his revenge for the previous match, hitting all three with chairs, 2 of which were pretty brutal shots, and Nova pinned De Niro after a swanton. 2 stars. 4. Danny During, Dan Morrison, and Roadkill, Mike DiPaoli, won the ECW tag titles from the FBI, Charles Spencer and James Maritato, in 9:01. During and Roadkill had vowed to split up their team if they didn't win the belts. Tony Mamaluke did an amazing move, which was a plancha outside the ring turning into a swinging DDT on the floor on Roadkill. The idea itself was nuts. Actually pulling it off was even more amazing. Match started out pretty hot, but the crowd burned out after a few minutes even though the work was strong. Roadkill did a springboard plancha on Graziano. Guido hit During with a title belt for a near fall. FBI did a double-team Fujiwara armbar on Roadkill. Mamaluke took this incredible bump off the apron over the guardrail form a During superkick, leading to the double-team buggy bang. Roadkill held Guido up while During came off the top with a guillotine leg drop for the pin. 2.75 stars. 5. C.W. Anderson, Chris Wright, pinned Tommy Dreamer, Tom Laughlin in 16:47. Dreamer looked much better in this match than he did in his TV match that aired over the weekend. Both guys traded working the left arm. They used a ring crew guy for some spots, with CW bullying him early, and him getting to put 2 feet in Anderson's face later. Louis dangerously came out and hit Dreamer with a phone shot, and Anderson gave Dreamer his own DDT finisher for a near fall. Paul Heyman then came out and hit Louis with a phone shot, but Anderson gave Dreamer a spinebuster for another near fall. Fans popped huge for that one. They should have gone home at that point because they lost the crowd about a minute later doing too many near falls using furniture. For some reason, after the first near fall using chairs or tables, the crowd becomes immune to future ones. Finally, Anderson used a spinebuster through the table for the clean win. Give Dreamer credit. You don't see a lot of top babyfaces that a company was once built around, cleanly putting over an upcoming heel in this kind of fashion. 2.75 stars. 6. Rhino Terry Guerin, pinned Spike Dudley, Matt Hyson, in 9:51 to retain the TV title. Dudley bled right away from a chair to the head and blade job. Dudley came off the top rope to the floor with a chair to the head. Well, he's only about 140 pounds, he's still doing it on a knee that was destroyed. He also did a balcony dive that looked to be from 11 to 12 feet up. The crowd never bought any of Spike's near falls no matter how good they looked. He went for the acid drop, but Rhino caught him and threw him over the top rope through a table. Dudley came back with 2 chairs to the head and 1 to the knee and tied Rhino's leg to the ropes and delivered a bunch of more chairs to the knee. Literally out of nowhere, Rhino on the ground, got behind him with a choke. Nobody saw that as a finish, as it was total Japanese style where the choke is over because it's real even though subtle. After the match, Rhino destroyed him some more with chair shots and brought out a table and speared Mike Keener through a table. 2.75 stars. They are clearly teasing a Corino versus Jack Victory program for down the line, with Corino joking that the reason Victory bleaches his hair is because it's all gray. Francine came in to give Corino a blowjob, but he apparently had just gotten one, so asked her to service Victory. But it was a setup, as credible Kane Corino and Francine bit Victory. 7. Mikey Whipwreck, John Watson, and Yoshihiro Tajiri defeated Super Crazy, Francisco Pantoja Islas, and Kid Cash, David Cash, in 1824. Not sure what the logic was in advertising a mystery partner when the guy was just a company regular, and on paper, announcing him would have made people think it was a better match anyway. Easily the show stealer, in particular the work of Tajiri and Crazy. Crowd went nuts for them as well. Jim Mitchell was back managing Whipwreck and Tajiri. Whipwreck and Tajiri sandwiched Crazy and Cash with 3 chairs. Crazy did a top rope Asai moonsault to the floor. Cash then springboard off ref John Finnegan's back and off the top rope onto the guys on the floor. Whipwreck did a stunner off the ropes onto 2 chairs on Cash and another stunner off the apron through a table. The table break got a pop, but the move looks stupid since it's clear Whipwreck's ass takes the whole bump. Crazy did his 3 moonsault series and a facebuster off the top and another moonsault. As the match went on, the head started dragging. Tajiri put Crazy in the tarantula, but Cash saved. Tajiri blew mist in Crazy's eyes. Cash did a Frankensteiner off the top rope backwards to the floor, sending Whipwreck through a table in a really sick spot. Tajiri did his stuff kicks to Crazy's head. Finally, Tajiri put Crazy on some chairs and put a table on top of him and did a double foot stomp off the top rope onto the table, which collapsed on Crazy for the pin. 3 3/4 stars. They did a quick promo of Tony DeVito getting off the train and Blue Boy getting a blowjob from Jasmine St. Clair while driving a car. They don't show it, just allude to it. 8. Steve Corino retained the ECW title over Justin Credible, Pete Polacco, and Jerry Lynn in 22:51. All 3 got very tepid reactions to their ring introduction, which was a bad sign. An even worse sign was that as they tried to wrestle, the crowd chanted, "We want Sandman." There have been lots of explanations about how dead the crowd was, the main ones being none of the 3 guys had strong face or heel presence, the belt isn't over, the brawling in the crowd couldn't be seen by much of the crowd live, which took them out of the match, and the solid work in this match paled when it came to the spectacular work of the previous match. In addition, there were flashers in the crowd, which notoriously kills matches. Credible nearly blew out his knee when he cracked it on the guardrail. Boy was he pissed, but he came back and worked the match fine. Lynn and Credible did a tremendous brawl spot in the aisle. Lynn whipped Corino over the guardrail into the first row. Lynn got a near fall with a tombstone on Credible. Lynn kicked a chair into Corino's face and gave him the cradle pile driver but didn't get the pin. Credible had 2 miscues with Lynn, where Lynn leapt over an attempted low blow by Francine and Credible got it. Credible then went to punch Lynn, who moved, and Francine got it. She sold her jaw the rest of the match. Credible pinned Lynn clean with a spinning tombstone in 11:42. Cyrus walked out on the broadcast to console Lynn. With Corino versus Credible, making this too similar to last month's final, which also didn't get a great crowd reaction even though the work was good, the crowd began chanting for Sandman again. Corino brought in a ladder. Both guys juiced. They did ladder spots. Crowd didn't care about who held the belt or these 2 guys at all. They brawled into the second deck where Credible started destroying Corino with cane shots. In a really good spot, Corino was hanging from the balcony and Credible was caning his hands until he let go. The drop only appeared to be 3 feet, but visually it looked great. The brawling in the crowd seemed to kill whatever limited interest there was. Corino kicked out of the spinning tombstone and then hit his old school expulsion and got the 3. No pop at all for the finish, and they rushed Sandman out there, without his usual long entrance, and he caned the hell out of Corino in victory, and left with the belt to send the crowd home happy. 3 1/4 stars. The WWF ran a UK-only pay-per-view event on December 2nd from the Sheffield, England arena in what was described in most reports as an average show largely saved by a good main event, which was changed to a 4-way with Kurt Angle vs. Rock vs. Steve Austin vs. Rikishi, with Triple H pulled from the show due to his back and hip injuries. The sellout crowd of 11,077, paying $536,866, comprised heavily of children and teenagers, was very hot early and kind of got tired as the show went on. It was announced that WWF would return for another pay-per-view billed as Insurrection on May 5th at Earl's Court in London. The show had live audio problems in the arena. It was fine on television. About the only real major note was the crowd reaction to William Regal. When Regal's face first appeared on the screen, the reaction was 80% cheers. He got the biggest face reaction on the show aside from the A-level guys Austin, Rock, and Undertaker. Regal then did a pre-match interview for his bout with Crash Holly, in which he apparently dropped the European title in a strange ending, attempting to turn the crowd on him. It was successful but unsuccessful according to reports. The report was he got it to where it was down to 40% cheers, but in doing so, most of the fans, who had come with a specific purpose of cheering Regal as a native who made it big, were told to do what they didn't want to, and Regal became just another wrestler on the card. They confiscated a lot of signs at the door. Apparently England doesn't have a First Amendment. Some were probably justifiable, but they were even confiscating signs as tame as "Fat Ass Rikishi broke my toilet." One report said that Taz announcing got old after 30 minutes and that Ross was a step off. Actually, with a long trip in, plus a long trip back out and having to do TV, it would be a shock if anyone would be 100%. This report is from a combination of numerous live reports and averaging out the star ratings. In a dark match, Val Venus pinned Bradshaw in the dark match with a roll-up using his feet on the ropes. Bradshaw gave Venus a stiff lariat after the match. Jim Ross and Taz did commentary since Jerry Lawler stayed back in Memphis doing the Power Pro TV show. Mick Foley and Deborah made the trip and opened the show announcing the new main event and said it would be a no DQ, no countout match. Angle cried about it to no avail. 1. Dudley's beat Edge and Christian and Test and Albert in a tables elimination match in 9:55. ENC got a big babyface pop coming out. Fans chanted for the tables right away. Albert went through a table first, eliminating his team. Christian was then put through the table for the win after Christian had saved Edge from going through the table. 2 stars. 2. Ivory pinned Lita to retain the women's title in 2:55 of what was generally considered the worst match on the show. 1 or 2 good spots but mainly a typical women's match. Lita went for a sunset flip, but Ivory was held from going over by Steven Richards and sat on Lita for the pin. 1/2 star. 3. Steve Blackman pinned Perry Saturn to retain the hardcore title in 6:03. Blackman did his usual spots and also suplexed Saturn on the floor. Saturn did a tope but Blackman, on the floor, hit him flying through with a cookie sheet. Blackman ended up getting the pin after kicking a chair into Saturn's face. Match didn't have much heat. Terry wasn't there. 1 3/4 stars. 4. Crash Holly pinned Regal to win the European title in 5:10. Regal was accidentally referred to as Steve by both Ross and Taz, and quite frankly, since everyone thinks of him as Steve and we're going to mess up calling him Steve probably forever, he might as well be Steve. He got a big reaction coming out, but then turned much of the crowd doing a heel promo. Crowd chanted Regal sucks, but close to half the crowd was still cheering him and there was also a loud chant for him. Regal got the pin, but Holly had his foot on the ropes. Match was restarted, and Holly got the pin after Molly nailed Regal with a missile dropkick. Everyone stood there confused when the ref counted 3. Regal left with the belt. 1.5 stars. 5. Billy Gunn and Chyna beat Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero in 12:15. Gunn pinned Malenko after the Cobra suplex when Chyna and Guerrero were fighting outside the ring. Malenko and Guerrero carried the match. Chyna wasn't even wearing a ring outfit. They did a double press slam spot where Gunn pressed Malenko and Chyna pressed Guerrero overhead. The Radicals were able to make Gunn look good. Gunn and Chyna didn't look good. 1.5 stars. 6. Kane pinned Chris Jericho in 8:04 after a choke slam. Everyone expected Jericho to win because he did so much PR work in the country the day before the show. Match was said to be pretty much the same as the Survivor Series match between the two. Fans didn't seem to care about the match even though Jericho got a huge reaction for his entrance. After the match, Jericho hit Kane with a chair and put him in the walls on him. 1 3/4 stars. Trish Stratus and Lita brawled backstage and Lita pulled Stratus' top off, leaving her in her bra. They brawled into Ivory's dressing room where she was changing and showed her bra as well. 7. Bull Buchanan and Goodfather retained the WWF tag titles over Hardys in 8:05. Jeff had Buchanan pinned with a swanton, but Venus interfered and did a splash off the top on Jeff behind the ref's back and Buchanan scored the pin. 1 3/4 stars. Backstage, ENC and Angle did a backstage interview. Christian was still selling from the tables. Also at this point, all the Radicals jumped Undertaker and Benoit hit him in the knee with a garbage can, which I guess was so Undertaker would sell and appear vulnerable in the next match. 8. Undertaker pinned Benoit in 12:15. Undertaker sold the knee most of the match. Benoit used a variety of leg locks including a figure 4 and a diving headbutt to the knee. They teased Undertaker wouldn't be able to wrestle due to the pre-match beating. Undertaker got the pin when Benoit went for a figure 4, and Taker gave him an inside cradle. Benoit did a good job carrying the match. 2.5 stars. 9. Angle retained the WWF title over Rock, Rikishi and Austin in 8:50. Austin got a bigger pop than Rock coming out. Match had a lot of near falls, but every time Angle was about to be pinned, Edge, Christian or the Radicals saved him. They teased Rock vs. Austin as the big spot in the match, and there was a huge pop when they finally squared off. Austin first hit a stunner on Rock but there was a save. A few minutes later, Rock got a big pop giving Austin the rock bottom but Rikishi saved. Angle then gave Rock the Olympic slam but no ref. Rock gave Rikishi the rock bottom but Edge made the save. Guerrero and Saturn interfered. It ended with Austin pinning Rikishi after an Olympic slam. After the match, Rock and Austin cleaned house on the Radicals, ENC, Angle and Rikishi and did the beer deal to end the show. 3.25 stars. The return of Vince McMahon as the focal point of Raw meant nothing to the ratings on December 4th, which stayed at the same level they've been the past few weeks. Raw drew a 4.98 rating, 4.67 first hour, 5.25 second hour, and a 7.4 share. Nitro did a 2.47 rating, 2.61 first hour, 2.34 second hour, and a 3.5 share. The total wrestling audience, going against a poorly rated NFL game and reruns on CBS, grew to 8.3 million. The overrun, with McMahon being given the finishers by Austin, Rock, and Undertaker, did a 5.37 rating, well below the overrun average since the company moved to TNN, and that was with his first Raw appearance in a major role in months, since leaving to become a genetic jackhammer. It wasn't even the highest rated segment in the show, as the peak surprisingly was a 5.40 for Gunn vs. Venus and Malenko vs. Lita. The Angle vs. Jericho title match drew a 5.34 rating. WCW had some good news, as the Steiner vs. Rection match and post-match Angle involving half the world boosted the final quarter to a 2.85. It was WCW's highest rated competitive quarter since the September 11th show, which was the show when Flair returned to TV. Clearly there are two factors that need to be pointed out in this. One is that many people expected that Rection in the main event would destroy the main event rating, and compare this number to Steiner's numbers against bigger stars in recent weeks such as Chronic, 2.13, Awesome, 1.87, Sting, 1.87, and Nash, 1.89. I wouldn't credit it to Rection, because I believe it was people expecting a Flair-Steiner confrontation to end the show is what drew the number, but clearly, Rection in that position was just as certainly not a negative. Head-to-head numbers saw, Raw at 4.05, Undertaker vs. Rikishi to 2.44, Page and Nash vs. 3 count, which is probably the residual Scott Hall expectations, Raw at 4.85, Goodfather and Buchanan vs. Hardys, ENC Angle with Dog and Quick, to 2.11, Clark vs. Reno, Goldberg vs. Smooth, Raw at 5.21, Benoit vs. Hardcore Holly, Vince Triple H confrontation and Rock interview, to 1.94, Jarrett vs. Conan, and Raw at 4.57, ENC vs. Dog and Quick, Vince meets Austin, to 2.85, Steiner vs. Rection, post-match Angle. Translated into viewers, Raw lost about 750,000 viewers going against the Steiner-Rection match and post-match Angle, while Nitro gained about 1,082,000 viewers. Numbers for November 27th saw Raw draw a 4.97 rating, 4.43 first hour, 5.44 second hour, and a 7.2 share. Nitro drew a 2.42 rating, 2.61 first hour, 2.23 second hour, and a 3.3 share. Monday Night Football drew a 12.50 rating and 21 share. The total pro wrestling audience at 7.9 million was at the same level it has been for most of football season. While Nitro's first hour was terrible, the second lowest first hour in years, the good news, which must speak for quality of the show in a positive way, is that the loss of viewers into the second hour was very small. The second hour was above what the head-to-head hour has been doing, and WWF's first hour was also that much lower than usual, since the total audience was basically the same. The Steiner vs. Ray main event on Nitro at 2.30 was the highest rated Nitro main event since October 2nd, which says something about telling a good story building up the match, but unfortunately the problem with the match itself probably negates some of that positive. Raw's Angle vs. Austin main event drew a 5.57 final quarter and a 5.63 overrun, which is almost identical to the fall season Raw main event average. Head-to-head quarters saw Raw at 4.08, Angle, Foley and Deborah interview, to 2.36, Page and Nash vs. Jindrak and O'Hare, and if you don't think the number was drawn by everyone expecting a Hall run-in, you're sadly mistaken. Raw at 4.53, Hollies vs. Tanda and Stratus, to 2.14, Goldberg vs. Reno, Bigelow vs. Rection, Raw at 4.34, Guerrero vs. Gunn, to 2.11, Jarrett vs. Mysterio Jr., and Raw at 4.76, Rock vs. Rikishi to 2.30, Steiner vs. Ray. SmackDown on November 30th drew a 4.41 rating, 5.07 realistic number, and 7 share, a figure below what it usually does despite NBC being in rerun mode against it. SmackDown on Thanksgiving night drew a record low 3.26 rating, 3.75 realistic number, and 6.1 share. Much of the rating decline can be blamed on Thanksgiving, since TV viewing as a whole was way down. But to just blame it all on Thanksgiving wouldn't be fair, because on nights like that, you have to look at the share percentage of people actually watching TV that are tuned to the show, because that factors out the disproportionately large percentage of people not watching TV because of the night. The SmackDown share was significantly down from usual. Thunder drew a 1.94 rating and 3.2 share on November 22nd, and a 2.40 rating and 3.5 share on November 29th. Weekend numbers for November 25th to 26th saw Livewire at 1.1, Superstars at 1.2 and Heat at a 1.99 rating and 2.9 share. For December 2nd to 3rd, it was Livewire at 1.0, Superstars at 1.0 and Heat with a lot more build-up because of Rock as co-host doing a 2.18 rating, a 3.3 share. Television Lucha Libre on November 28th was cut down to just 1 hour because of soccer, airing one AAA match and one EMLL match. The show drew a 1.3 Hispanic rating, however the male 18 to 34 target audience drew a 4.2 within the demo. Mexico. EMLL has a major loaded lineup for its December 15th pay-per-view, as they've got the formula, the main event that will draw money and the undercard that will provide action, very similar to the successful WCW formula when they were doing well. And the bad news of that is you all know how that turned out a few years later. But at least this group is developing new talent. Pero Aguayo vs. Cien Caras in a hair versus hair match headlines in the latest in the long line of EMLL main events that could have taken place in the late 70s. The only problem is that Aguayo is claiming he's going to retire, and you can only cry wolf so many times. Thankfully the match will only be one fall. Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero defend the CMLL tag titles against El Hijo del Santo and Negro Casas, in a Parejas Increíbles Técnicos and Rudos teaming together match. It'll be Atlantis and Mr. Niebla, Tex, and El Satánico Rudo, versus Tarzan Boy, Técnico, who has turned on all the other Tex, and the fans hate him, and Emilio Charles Jr., who also turned on the Tex a few weeks back but isn't a Rudo, and Shocker, Top Hill at Arena Mexico inside the ring, Los Villanos versus Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Panther and Black Warrior, which is the classic old-style Lucha Libre match, Felino and Safari and Tony Rivera versus Fuerza Guerrera and Violencia and Bestia Salvaje in an elimination match, and Ricky Marvin and Sombra de Plata versus Alan and Chris Stone, motocross with a new name, in a battle of the young high flyers. It's really too bad this didn't get worked out for American pay-per-view, as except for the main event, which has legends and will have heat, although it's another of those EMLL matches that could have taken place in the late 70s and would have been better at that time. This on paper looks to be an excellent show. Ricky Marvin won the Mexican national lightweight title from Virus on November 29th in Acapulco. Juventud Guerrera returned to AAA on the December 1st show in Tijuana, teaming with the Headhunters to lose via DQ to Octagon and Venom Black and Zorro in the semifinal. All Japan caught the November 26th Jumbo Tsuruta 1-hour NTV network special. The show was more about the circumstances of his death and about his wife and young family, showing them living on in Oregon. It was very sad. While there were wrestling clips, wrestling was clearly secondary in this special to the circumstances of his death, and his last days and his family that has lived on without him. It was more about a famous Japanese celebrity who behind the scenes was just a normal guy with a family that passed away young, who happened to make his fame as a pro wrestler when pro wrestling was really popular and had faded from the spotlight over the past decade, as opposed to the death of a famous wrestler. They had nearly as much stuff on him growing up as on his pro wrestling, and a lot of stuff on his teaching in recent years after pro wrestling. Mitsuharu Misawa was one of the close friends of his interviewed for the special. At press time, there is one show left in the tag team tournament on December 6th in Sapporo. Basically, Steve Williams and Mike Rotundo, wrestling as the 21st Century Varsity Club, have clinched a spot in the finals on December 9th at Budokan Hall. In Sapporo, the two remaining tournament matches are Toshiaki Kawada and Masa Fuchi versus Genichiro Tenryu and Nobutaka Araya. Kawada and Fuchi need a win to go into the finals and a draw to go into a playoff. Williams and Rotundo also face Johnny Smith and Taiyo Kia, and if Smith and Kia pull an upset, they'll be in the finals, and with a draw and a Kawada and Fuchi draw or loss, they can still make it in. If Smith and Kia and Kawada and Fuchi both lose or draw, then Mike Barton and Jim Steele, who finished the tournament, are in the finals as well. Standings at press time. Williams and Rotundo, Record 5 wins, 1 loss, 0 draws. Total 10 points. Barton and Steele. Record 4 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw. Total 9 points. Kawada and Fuchi. Record 3 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. Total 8 points. Smith and Kia. Record 3 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. Total 8 points. Genichiro Tenryu and Nobutaka Araya. Record 3 wins, 3 losses. Total 6 points. Barry and Kendall Windham. Record 3 wins, 4 losses. Total 6 points. Mitsuya Nagai and Masahito Kakihara. Record 1 win, 5 losses, 0 draws. Total 2 points. Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Dan Crawford. Record 0 wins, 6 losses. Total 0 points. Tournament results for the week saw November 30th in Yamata, which drew an announced sellout of 2,800, saw Williams and Rotundo over Nagai and Kakihara and Smith and Kia over Windham's. December 1st in Morioka before an announced 1,800 saw Barton and Steele over Windham's and Tenryu and Araya over Nagai and Kakihara. December 2nd in Sendai before 2,100 at Miyagi Sports Center saw Kawada and Fuchi over Fujiwara and Crawford, Tenryu and Araya over Smith and Kia when Araya pinned Smith with a Fat Man moonsault in 1936 and Williams and Rotundo beat Barton and Steele when Williams pinned Barton with the back suplex in 1701. December 5th in Obihiro saw Nagai and Kakihara over Windham's when Nagai made Kendall submit to an armbar and Barton and Steele clinched a spot in the finals beating Crawford and Fujiwara in 23:07 when Steele pinned Crawford. Pro Wrestling Noah. In a major surprise after all that has been said, Shinya Hashimoto will debut on the December 23rd Ariake Coliseum show. It was really strange on so many levels because they talked so much about wanting the media focus for the biggest show in company history on the loyal wrestlers and not have the focus on the Hashimoto debut, which they could save for later. It was also reported that the building was sold out, 10,000 paid. Although I'm skeptical of that because 2 days before the announcement of 10,000, they had 6,000 tickets sold. But that was not the case and probably explains Hashimoto debuting on the show. If it was the case, there would be no reason to waste the historical first match on something that can't sell them any significant amount of new tickets. The main matches on the show are Kenta Kobashi vs. Jun Akiyama, which is their strongest in-ring match at this point, occupying the main event position over Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Vader, which theoretically because of the grudge, and it being the biggest name native against the biggest name foreigner in Japan. Hashimoto debuts third from the top against Takao Omori, while Akira Tao faces Yoshihiro Takayama, and FMW's Wu Tag titles are at stake as All Japan's Tamon Honda and Namichi Marufuji defend against Koto Fuyuki and Tetsuhiro Kuroda. From this week's magazine photos, Hashimoto looked really old and out of shape. It was a noticeable difference from his last match on October 9th at the Dome. Misawa suffered a knee injury on the November 26th show in Toshimi. The severity was undisclosed, but it is believed he won't be missing any shows. Richard Slinger injured his knee on the December 4th show in Isazaki against Namichi Marufuji badly enough that he's out for the rest of the tour and may be out for the January tour as well. New Japan. The Tokyo Dome show on January 4th is going to be headlined by a 6-man tournament for the IWGP Heavyweight title with Toshiaki Kawada, Kensuke Sasaki, Masahiro Chono, Yuji Nagata, Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and Satoshi Kojima. Kawada is the only outsider. This makes sense from the All Japan perspective as they protect their world title, Genichiro Tenryu, by not having to do a job. It is believed Kawada and Sasaki will get first-round buys and be figured in, but the entire bracketing will be announced on the December 14th pay-per-view show. Shinjiro Otani also returns on the Dome show. There is talk of a singles match with Nakanishi vs. Keiji Muto, probably to give Nakanishi a big win on the show. The pay-per-view lineup in Osaka was announced as Super Strong Machine and Kensuke Sasaki vs. Masahiro Chono and Team 2000 Machine, Hiroyoshi Tenzan vs. Yutaka Yoshi, Kendo Kashin vs. Michiyoshi Ohara, Minoru Tanaka and Jushin Liger and Shinya Makabe vs. Super Delphin, Tsubasa and Takahiro Murahama, New Japan vs. Osaka Pro in OPW's home grounds of Osaka, Satoshi Kojima vs. Kenzo Suzuki, a rookie who is super green going against one of the company's best workers, Manabu Nakanishi vs. Osamu Nishimura, Tatsumi Fujinami vs. Koji Kanemoto in the main event of tournament champs Takashi Izukai and Yuji Nagata facing an all-Japan team. That will be announced this coming week and maybe Kawada and Taiokiya Mossman Izuka and Nagata won the tag team tournament before a disappointing crowd of 4,500 in Hiroshima. Although the New Japan Tag Tourney is not traditionally the big deal the All Japan Tournament is, the idea that the finals couldn't sell out Hiroshima for its big show of the year is a bad sign. With 4 teams finishing tied with 4-2 records, in the semifinals, Tenzan and Kojima beat Nakanishi and Yoshi in 15:58 when Tenzan pinned Nakanishi after a moonsault, and Iizuka and Nagata beat Chono and Scott Norton in 12:06 when Iizuka got the surprising win over Chono with a choke. In the finals, Nagata and Iizuka beat IWGP Tag Champs Tenzan and Kojima in 1909, which put them in the pay-per-view main event and also sets them up next year for a tag title shot, so from that perspective the win made sense. The fact they probably would win was hinted when Nagata came out wearing a Masakazu Fukuda t-shirt. Fukuda is the wrestler who had just joined the G-Eggs group before he passed away earlier this year from a brain hemorrhage. Current tour ended on December 2nd in Tokushima with the junior heavyweight tag title put on as the main event as Koji Kanemoto and Minoru Tanaka retained it over Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Kendo Kashin when Kanemoto used an ankle lock submission on Takaiwa in 1906. November 18th TV drew a 2.1 rating and November 25th drew a 2.3. Other Japan notes. Antonio Inoki's New Year's Eve Osaka Dome card will air live on pay-per-view in Japan. Tickets for the show were officially put on sale on December 3rd, but reports are that there were already 10,000 pre-reservations for the best seats. No lineup has been announced except Kazushi Sakuraba vs Kendo Kashin, which will be a pro wrestling match because Sakuraba isn't about to do a shoot 8 days after the Ryan Gracie match. It'll be Sakuraba's first pro wrestling match since making it big in the shoot world with his wins over the various Gracies. The storyline is that during the New Japan vs UWFI feud, Kashin, then under his real name of Tokumitsu Ishizawa, had 2 pro wrestling matches with Sakuraba, winning both via submission. Since Sakuraba is now a big deal, and Kashin is dead because of the destruction in a shoot at the hands of Ryan Gracie, what seems to make sense is to book them in a pro wrestling match, give Kashin tons of offense and near submissions and make it exciting, and then protect Sakuraba by winning, which also builds up future matches with Sakuraba against the other New Japan juniors down the line, but hopefully a strong showing rehabilitates Kashin. The plan seems to be to have a Dream Superstars Battle Royal and a one-night tag team tournament. Clearly from those matches, it'll be more along the lines of pro wrestling than shoot fighting. It'll also be Nobuhiko Takada's return to pro wrestling, trying to put together the rematch with Keiji Muto. There was a women's shoot fighting tournament promoted by the Neo Ladies Pro Wrestling promotion called Remix on December 5th at Budokan Hall before about 4,000 fans. Marlos Koenen, a protege of Gerard Gordeau, won the tournament over former national judo champ Megumi Yabushita, who wrestles for the JD promotion in Japan, winning a unanimous decision after 10 minutes in the finals. Koenen had the hottest finish, a flying armbar on Dan Severn protege Becky Levy in the semifinals. The other semifinal was a huge upset as Yabushita, who weighs about 120, beat 320-pound former Olympic judoka Svetlana Gundarenko, 1992, 1996, also did pro wrestling and won the first L1 tournament several years back, destroying everyone with her size. Gundarenko had already tapped out women's pro wrestling star Kyoko Inoue, and Hickson Gracie protege Erin Terhillen was expected to win the whole thing. Yabushita kept reversing her on the ground to get the decision. There was a good deal of interest in this show because not only did it air live on pay-per-view in Japan, and the reviews of the show were very good, with people saying it was considerably better than the Pancrase pay-per-view the previous day, and people were surprised at just how advanced the fighting was with women. Also, Japanese movie star Atsuko Sakuraba fought a non-tourney singles match, but lost to an armbar to another Japanese woman, which brought out a tons of press for the show. Candy Akutsu Tomoko Akutsu, 25, announced her retirement from Immersion effective with the December 17th Sapporo show and would have a retirement ceremony on January 5th at Korakuen Hall. Akutsu wrestled for 7.5 years and was a very good worker, with her main claim to fame being the innovator of the rolling German suplex that Chris Benoit now uses in the WWF. She started in JWP, where she held both the AJW and JWP junior titles in the mid-90s before leaving JWP due to injuries in 1997 to become a fitness instructor. When Asia Kong formed her 4 months later, she made a comeback as Miss Perfect, a takeoff on Kurt Hennig and Ernesto Hust's gimmick, because she was such a good technical wrestler. She also wrestled under a mask as Tiger Dream, and recorded a CD. Ayako Hamada, 19, captured the Queen of Immersion title on December 3rd at Korakuen Hall, beating Asia Kong. Mika Akino won the Sky High Immersion, like a cruiserweight belt, over Shaparita Asari, while Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda won the Twin Stars Immersion tag titles, over Gami and Ritamata before about 1,400 fans. Here and there. Scott Hall's latest arrest was over the weekend after a dispute with a cab driver who wouldn't take a credit card for payment. He started kicking in the doors of the cab. Mike Mooneyham in the Charleston Post-Courier wrote a tremendous article before this latest arrest that ran this past weekend talking about last week's arrest. Hall, driving on the wrong side of a 6-lane highway, apparently caused a collision with 2 other vehicles, and the accident scene was referred to as a bloody mess. Police found 2 open and 1 unopened beer bottle. The story said Hall had been despondent about personal matters and drank all night before the accident. He failed to show up the morning of the accident to pick up his children for visitation rights over Thanksgiving weekend. Scott's estranged wife Dana said, "It's a shame that these so-called friends of Scott would persist in urging the fans to get Scott to return. It is only cruel of them to give the fans false hope, not to mention Scott. Obviously these men do not know all the facts or understand the seriousness of his most recent arrest. Obviously they do not wish to acknowledge that Scott did not start drinking because he lost his job, but lost his job because of his addiction. He did not start drinking after our divorce. We divorced because of his addictions and infidelities. They obviously do not understand or care that their friend and my husband and father or our children is on a very self-destructive path and is in need of help from his friends, not urgings to return, or even believe he can return to what has contributed to further destroy his marriage, our family and his life. Obviously they do not understand or care that he could have been killed others or his children. They do not understand or care that if he continues on this path without intervention, they will be attending his funeral the next time they see their friend. Then they can explain to his children how much they cared or tried to help their feather." Hall's visitation rights were canceled after the Thanksgiving week escapade until a judge reviewed the case. Hall had signed an agreement that he not consume any illegal substances or alcohol within 24 hours of any contact time with his children. Bruno Sammartino, 65, will be honored on December 8 in the tiny mountain town in Italy of Pozzoferrato, where he grew up. The house he grew up in, which was built by his parents in 1930, will be made an historical monument with a statue of him and a marble plaque that says this is the house that Bruno Sammartino was born in, and they will name a new athletic facility the Bruno Sammartino Coliseum. Sammartino lived in the house in the town of 1,400 people until the age of 14 when his family came to the United States. It will be the first time Sammartino has been back to the town since 1966. When he gets back, a documentary of his life is being planned. Neil Isaac, the referee of the Dennis Rodman vs. Kurt Hennig match that aired on pay-per-view, has threatened to file suit against Rodman. Rodman threw the ref out of the ring without the ref's knowledge in an impromptu spot which the referee said caused him emotional grief, humiliation, and embarrassment. How can this be serious? The iGeneration Group is planning its second pay-per-view on March 25th, which is the Sunday before WrestleMania, and on Wrestling Observer Live on November 30th, promoter Steve Seiden announced that on that show Tonya Harding and female boxing attraction Playboy covergirl Mia St. John as celebrities that will be trained to be part of the company. MMA. There were rumors in the martial arts world this past week of a Mark Coleman vs. Ken Shamrock match taking place on the December 23rd Pride show, but that is not going to happen. Shamrock won't be fighting on the show. There is still talk of a match with Mark Hall for sometime next year, but it fell through as it regards the show. Shamrock is being talked with about appearing on the Inoki New Year's Eve Osaka Dome show, but that would most likely be as a pro wrestler as his next shoot fight is scheduled for February for Pride. He is considering, but has not yet accepted an invitation to compete in the Pride World Championship tournament. He may want to trim down to 198, he last fought at 211, and go for the middleweight division where his strength would be more of a factor than going against the bigger, stronger heavyweights. The December 23rd show will air on January 6th in the US on pay-per-view, but only for those with DirecTV or a dish. Vitor Belfort suffered a broken hand in training, so he's also off the show. While not officially announced by Pride, there are also rumors of a Dan Henderson vs. Wanderlei Silva match for that show. Pancrase ran its biggest show of the year on December 4th at Budokan Hall for Masakatsu Funaki's retirement ceremony before 6,500 fans, a figure that was heavily papered. For the company, it wasn't bad financially because BS Asahi, which aired the show on pay-per-view, covered the building costs because they felt it was important to have it come from a major arena even though they didn't have the lineup to sell tickets. Tatsumi Fujinami, Jushin Liger, Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Satoru Sayama all came to the presentation. Funaki cried when Fujiwara, his shooting trainer, and Minoru Suzuki, his contemporary who along with Ken Shamrock were the founders of the Pancrase organization in 1993 and the first to do legit shoot pro wrestling matches probably since the turn of the century on any kind of a regular basis. Funaki said that he would become the executive producer of the promotion, and he was also looking to get into acting. Main event on the show saw Nathan Marquardt retain the King of Pancrase middleweight title going to a 20-minute straw with Kiyuma Kunyoku. One judge gave the decision to Kunyoku. Other two ruled it a draw. Frank Shamrock vs. Elvis Sinasek of Australia has been confirmed for the K1 Tokyo Dome show on December 10th. In the 8-man K1 Grand Prix tournament, Mike Bernardo suffered a left foot injury in training and will be out of action for at least 3 months, so Ray Sefo takes his place in his first round match against Musashi. WCW. If nothing else, Nitro on December 4th in Lincoln, Nebraska built to a great finish. Show opened with Oklahoma Ed Ferrara doing his Jim Ross impression. Madden got his shot in at the real Jim Ross, calling him a miserable human being but one of the all-time great announcers. I guess that's what happens when WWF isn't going to buy WCW. Since they were in Nebraska, the Oklahoma deal actually got super heat. It doesn't translate into anything having anything to do with wrestling, but it got the crowd going. The idea was Sid choke slamming him to get a huge face pop, which did work. However, for the people watching at home, as opposed to the 3,500 in the building, that doesn't mean a whole lot. Sanders then had Vicious arrested and Madden said "Book 'em Dano," a line from a 70s TV show Hawaii 5-0. Sanders then told Steiner that Flair had Vicious arrested, so Steiner vowed to get Flair before the end of the show. Conan got a great promo on Jarrett and Harris twins, but of course he got squashed later, so it meant nothing, setting up a 6-man street fight on the pay-per-view. Chavo Guerrero Jr., wrestling under that name having left MIA, pinned Kiwi. They tried some new spots. Not a great match and it wasn't smooth, but you can tell they worked hard on it. Crowbar kept the hardcore title over Skipper. Cat, Jones and Storm came out to build for Cat vs. Storm on pay-per-view. Daphne came out with Crowbar, which made no sense storyline-wise. Daphne tried to hit on Crowbar after the match, but he blew her off for Nitro Girls. Cat attacked Madden to set up a miscue where Duggan tried to hit Cat with his 2x4 but hit Storm. Jimmy Hart did the same interview he does every week. Luger did an interview with Dwayne Bruce, Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, at ringside. Luger was entertaining, which is a rarity. He did the deal where he talked about Bruce as Goldberg's trainer, which meant he was about to get beat up, and ran him down saying while Goldberg is rich, Bruce and his family are struggling, and made fun of him. The gimmick was that Goldberg hadn't arrived yet. Steiner beat up Smiley, who was scheduled to wrestle Goldberg. Backstage, Lash LaRue was talking with Chavo Jr., making it clear he's about to quit the falling apart MIA. DDP and Nash beat 3 count in one of those insane booking deals. Because of the size difference, particularly Nash versus Moore, the match looked stupid and Nash wouldn't sell anything, which only made it worse. They not only squashed them, but embarrassed them, with Nash powerbombing Moore after nearly killing him with a Beal, and Page cutting helms and Nash pinning both guys at the same time. Nash and DDP are calling themselves the Insiders, which is a tremendous way to get the fans to chant for Hall without them having to open their mouth. Nash is pure genius, as the crowd knows to chant the name, he pauses to acknowledge and encourage it, that actually doesn't have to say his name. The funny part of this is that if Bischoff buys the company, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him bring Hall back as one of his first moves. Unfortunately, put back in that environment, he could also wind up being the next Pillman. And after this match and that finish, they probably don't understand why fans don't get into 3 counts great undercard matches, such as a 3-way ladder match with Karagias and Noble and Young Dragons on Starrcade, when fans just see them as battle of the impotent jobbers that there's no point in caring about using ladders. Compare that to WWF's booking of the Hardys, once they recognized that the Hardys could really go. Check those sales charts of the Hardys videos versus sales of the Nash and DDP videos while you're at it. Sanders came out with the NBTs and showed Flair a tape from Mayhem showing that Nash pinned Stasiak, but Palumbo was the legal man, so Flair had no choice but to strip Nash and DDP of the belts, give them back to Stasiak and Palumbo, and set up a tag title match at Starrcade. Bigelow jumped Awesome in the parking lot as a way to build up their match since Awesome still can't wrestle. Reno beat Brian Clark by DQ in 28 seconds when Brian Adams and Clark beat up Reno and wouldn't stop until Marie talked Vito into making the save. Vito walked out on his brother after. Weren't Marie and Vito boyfriend and girlfriend a few weeks back? Goldberg destroyed MI Smooth in 51 seconds. Jarrett beat Conan when the Harris twins interfered and did the H-bomb on Conan. Jarrett did a good job here. Conan, working with a good worker, looked much better than he has since coming back from the tricep injury. Steiner beat Rection with a recliner to keep the title in 8:40. Rection got a near fall with the moonsault. Match was laid out and Rection really worked hard given a main event spot. Steiner has the awesome presence, but he's really limited in what he can do and is just too big for his frame to move well. But when he was smaller and a better worker, he never got anywhere near this kind of a push. And they say the business doesn't encourage steroid use. Steiner kept the recliner on after the match. He then went backstage after Flair, but instead attacked Anderson with a pipe and gave him a good beating and put him in the recliner. Flair tried to make the save but Fit Finlay held him back. This made no sense since Flair told security to be ready for Steiner, and there he is in the ring, the most obvious hiding place, and no security is around. Goldberg ran in for the save but was blindsided by a chair shot by Luger. This reeked of awesomeness, and that's probably the only time in Luger's career anything he did qualified as that. Luger destroyed Bruce with a chair as well. Sid suddenly was in the ring and they went off the air with a heated pull-apart. As good as this segment was, people were pissed backstage. They had spent a ton of time all afternoon setting up the finish, where Sid would drive a police car into the building for the save with the lights flashing, get out and run in. And he did all that, except the cameras missed the police car arriving in the back, its entire drive into the building. Sid getting out as the driver only picked it up when he was already being held back in the ring. Seriously, how do things so regularly get this screwed up? Notes from Thunder taped immediately following. Flair opened the show saying that Sid and Steiner were both sent home for their actions and that Steiner was suspended and stripped of the title. Fans live groaned as both Starrcade main eventers being sent home. A lot of fans left, which is a bad omen for viewers watching on TV if people who paid for tickets would react like that. Most fans stayed because it was hyped Goldberg would wrestle Douglas in the main event. Sanders tried to convince Flair he was overreacting, but he wouldn't listen. Anderson then did an awesome promo, getting Flair to admit he was wrong, and he put the belt back on Steiner and said he's be back at TV on Nitro. Jindrak and O'Hare beat Noble and Karagias in what was said to have been decent considering the size difference. Awal and C. Bigelow in a match to determine a challenger for Crowbar at Starrcade for the hardcore title. Freeway with Crowbar vs. Vito vs. Reno has been canned, so it'll end up Crowbar vs. Awal most likely. Awesome costing Bigelow the rematch would make sense, and Vito and Reno vs. Chronic. Cat and Dragons beat Storm and Duggan and Skipper when Duggan screws up again. Guerrero Jr. won the Cruiserweight belt pinning Sanders after a brainbuster. The idea is to get people like Guerrero, Kidman and Mysterio Jr. back in the Cruiserweight title picture, although Kidman and Mysterio Jr. are considering it a step down, which is more a problem with the handling of the division for so long. Said to be a pretty good match. Bagwell pinned Wright when Disco's interference backfired. Clark beat Vito after Adams interfered and Reno made the save. Maine saw Goldberg pin Douglas, which saw the major angle being Luger putting Bruce and Hirak on stage. Some Thunder notes from the November 29th show. Sid Vicious actually had a storyline explanation for getting a title shot. His interview was pretty bad nonetheless. His catchphrase was "at bees that way sometimes." It's pretty sad when you're stealing your catchphrases from downtown Bruno. Also on the show they revealed that Reno and Vito were brothers in the storyline and Daphne returned, having split up with Ozzy, going after Crowbar, who I guess is in the middle of empty relationships with Nitro girls who are after him only for his belt. I don't know what to say about David Flair in the ring other than he needs to be off TV and given some serious in-ring training before coming back. They started the planned MIA split with Chavo Guerrero walking out on general erection. On the TV version of the Steiner vs. Bagwell match, they spliced in the clip of Sid on the screen, which never came on the screen live during the match and was supposed to lead to the near fall. The fact production didn't get the clip on during the match was the main thing Bagwell threw his fit about backstage. After seeing what production would have needed to do to get it right, Bagwell certainly had the right to be upset. I can't say if he overreacted, but this was hardly something that difficult to get on a screen on cue. Stevie Ray did a very convincing retirement interview. This made me remember the days when, at least on the show itself, they played the angles out like they were legit instead of it being one great big inside joke that everyone makes obvious is a joke and can't be taken seriously. There was an edict that the bookers got after the tapings last week that there can be no more mentions of allusions to Hall on television or else from Diana Myers of WCW Legal. Or else what? I know what they should do. The next guy who goes against the script on a live broadcast should be punished according to WCW's consistent policy. He should be given the world title on the first offense. Second offense, he should be given a raise in the world title. Third offense, he should get away without doing any jobs for 6 months. Fourth offense, He should start beating 7 people at once in every angle without selling. 5th offense, he should be named new booker. Regarding the interview itself, nobody backstage gave Page and Nash any specific instructions of what to talk about, so they just went into business for themselves. It was a production miscue when they played the Wolfpack music when the NBTs came out immediately afterwards.
With Heenan now off TV, his last worldwide show aired on November 25th, and Hudson and Zbyszko are doing the show for now, although Zbyszko was also given word his contract isn't going to be renewed unless WWF picks him up. WCW should bring him back one last Nitro to honor him for real,
with no angles. Forget about his work in the last year or two. The unfortunate thing about sports and entertainment is few go out on top, and Heenan had his better years, but he's been around pro wrestling for about 35 years, gave much of himself to entertain the fans, and was, if you throw in longevity and money drawing, the greatest manager this business has ever seen, and a great television personality as well. In hindsight, it is really sad WCW couldn't do anything for Bret Hart, but it may have been for the better because nobody would have believed it, thinking it was an angle. But that's sad, also.
The show must go on, but it would be nice if every now and then, the show could pause for a few moments to honor those who brought new fans to the table and entertained so many.
I'd suggest it for Starrcade, as a non-advertised special. What's the worst that could happen? 5 minutes may be taken off a mid-card match that the fans aren't going to react to anyway.
Believe it or not, Vampiro may stay with WCW and WCW may keep him.
None of this has worked out officially, but he also has not been fired, nor has he officially quit in spite of everything that has gone down in the past month. Vampiro did apologize to Terry Taylor for his remarks a few weeks back, since Taylor was always in his corner. There was tremendous heat on him for some of the things he said, but the company is making an attempt to work things out, and Vampiro dropped agent Bob Barnett, who WCW had a major problem with, on the guise that he was now being represented by ICP's people as part of his musical deal.
There is also the deal due to the nature of everything that a lawsuit could be filed, and maybe keeping him on with full pay while injured could be a way to avert the lawsuit.
Mysterio Jr.'s knee is giving him a lot of trouble, likely from coming back too soon. Nash's knee is giving him trouble as well.
In the match with Steiner on Nitro when he was hung in the corner, Rexon's knee ligaments may have been torn.
It wasn't known how badly his knee was hurt after the match. Booker T's sternum wasn't cracked, but it was injured. His knee will probably be scoped, so he should be back in 1 or 2 months. Because Flair, in his CEO role, has forgotten match stipulations and matches he's supposed to announce on his interviews, they're doing a deal where Tony Schiavone gets an envelope with the idea that after Flair's interview, whatever he's supposed to say and doesn't, Schiavone can claim by opening the envelope it is information that Flair has given him to release.
The heat with Mark Madden and DDP is sort of legit. DDP was mad at Madden for making the line about his face being made of leather.
DDP called him up about it, and in the course of the conversation, Kimberly cussed out Madden. Madden apparently took it out by burying DDP hard on Nitro.
Most likely this will either be dropped, or play into an angle at a later date, but it didn't start as an angle. Scott Anton was in the office looking for work, which is no surprise.
WCW has upped its offer for Tori Wilson to stay to $100,000 per year. She's also attempting to get an offer from the WWF.
Hal's show on December 3rd in Kearney, Nebraska was something of a success, drawing 3,479, paying $106,432, which was about 1,000 shy of capacity.
One of the reasons is it was one of the first events ever at the new building. Goldberg beat Luger on top.
Nitro on December 4th in Lincoln, Nebraska drew 3,433, which was 2,538, paying $70,195.
WWF. At the Horizon Awards held on November 29th in Atlanta, they named Vince McMahon Sports Executive of the Year. Bill Goldberg was a presenter of the awards, although not that specific award.
I actually strongly disagree with that one, not that McMahon didn't have quite the year this year, because no denying he did.
But by their own admission, it is not sport. It would be like if Ringling Brothers had a great year, with the guy who turned it around by a for Sports Executive of the Year. Should Triple H be considered for Athlete of the Year?
Actually, I'd almost go with the latter as being more viable, because pro wrestling is athletic, but it isn't a sport at the executive level but an entertainment form.
They gave him credit for the award for his work in both the WWF and XFL, but being that the XFL hasn't even played a game, I'd say using the XFL as a reason for giving him the award is terribly premature. The earliest projections for Survivor Series are a 1.0 buy rate, or 400,000 buys. This was the first normal buy rate for a WWF pay-per-view show since Austin's return and be among the lowest if not the lowest of the year. Since both Survivor Series and SummerSlam drew less buys than non-major shows before and after, it shows that with the exception of WrestleMania and perhaps Royal Rumble, there is no longer any regard for name when it comes to the casual fan buying a show, and they buy based on what the money match is. The fact Austin vs. Triple H was way down from the previous several events speaks either for that match and how over the car Angle really was, or the popularity of wrestling declining. You never know, but one would think the next one may not do any better.
Last year's six-way for the title drew the second lowest buy rate of $19.99.
I guess they are counting on the sex appeal of Hell in a Cell to make up for the lack of a focused main event. The New York Post on November 29 ran an article largely based around an interview by Bret Hart with some responses from Ellie Hart, Neidhart, and Jerry McDevitt. Hart praised Vince McMahon for what he did with pro wrestling in the 80s as far as cleaning it up.
He talked about the steroid use during that era, saying the company turned a blind eye to it.
Ellie Neidhart blamed Bret Hart, using the Bret had a vendetta against Vince from the Survivor Series defense regarding the circumstances leading to Owen's death. McDevitt stated, "I think Bret is angry the lawsuit is now behind them, but the rest of the family is relieved." McDevitt noted that Owen was one of the people who was instrumental in Bulldog being hired by the WWF, and while the deal wasn't finalized, it was largely agreed upon before Owen's death.
It also should be noted that Bret Hart has stated he wasn't upset with Bulldog for going back to the WWF because he was a wrestler and there are only two places to go, and he needed a job, but for his public statements after Owen's death saying McMahon had nothing to do with it. McDevitt noted Jim Neidhart had been fired by the WWF before the settlement was final, which is true by a couple of weeks. However, one has to ask whether Neidhart, with his personal track record, would have been hired to train pro wrestlers had the lawsuit not been in existence in the first place. Raw from December 4th at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Show opened with Rikishi pinning Undertaker. There was some interference from Angle, but the pin was about as clean as Undertaker is going to do these days after a side kick and a bonsai. After the match, Angle and Rikishi put the boots to Undertaker. Goodfather and Buchanan kept tag titles over Hardys. Real good match, which is amazing considering the champs, but Hardys looked great. Jeff did a swanton on Goodfather, but the Dudleys, dressed as RTC members, distracted the ref who missed Buchanan giving Jeff the axe kick and putting Goodfather on top for the pin. Dudleys costing Hardys the belts makes no sense after SmackDown. They brought up that ridiculous-looking Teddy Long count from last week.
Almost made you think they were going to turn him heel manager. Dog and Quick and ENC both wanted a title shot, so Deborah set up a match to determine the top contenders.
Malenko brought Lita flowers and asked her out.
She turned him down and was actually kind of a jerk about it. Triple H and Rikishi formed a pact. That won't last because Triple H is the smartest guy. Benoit beat Bob Holly with a crossface.
They are pushing Bob having a metal plate in his arm, but already killed it off since Benoit beat him, but for some reason the crossface didn't work on the normal side, so Benoit put it on the other side.
Why a crossface, which mainly puts pressure on your neck, doesn't work because you have a plate in your forearm is beyond me. Vince and Triple H had a face-off. Kind of lame, really. Vince did remind Triple H he hasn't forgotten about last year's Armageddon.
WWF missed it here because at that point the announcers needed to fill in the story, because while Vince and Triple H remembered, and many fans remembered, many other fans are new or don't remember.
A clip probably should have been shown.
Rock did an interview with Kevin Kelly as Hermie. Rock was absolutely hilarious.
He was making fun of the other 5 guys in the match and crowd went nuts for this promo.
ENC beat Quick and Dog. ENC rapped before the match and got over a lot more doing it than Quick and Dog.
That also meant Quick and Dog didn't get to rap. Christian pinned Dog after Edge did the Edgomatic. Angle wanted to join with Triple H and Rikishi's group, and they let him, but made it clear he was a geek they were playing. Ventura did an XFL promo.
This was even funnier than ENC, having Jesse talk about the nobleness of these players playing the game for no money coming from the highest paid person in the entire league that got the position largely because he won the election as governor.
Angle pinned Jericho to keep the title in 6:51 of one of the best TV matches of the year.
Tremendous from start to finish, great close calls.
Jericho hit the lion salt after a ref bump and Long ran in as the second ref to count the near fall. Jericho put the walls on but Kane pulled Long out of the ring. Jericho punched Kane, who landed on Long. Angle hit the Olympic slam and the first ref, Earl Hebner, counted the 3. Kane choke slammed Jericho after the match.
Angle got mad at Rikishi and Triple H for not helping.
They played him by saying once they saw Kane out there it was under control. Gunn and see Venus in an IC title match.
China is already back with Venus. The idea last week was to split them up, but I guess they had no ideas for China and they have to keep her in a prominent role with her book coming out and her boyfriend running the show and her celebrity status in the company. Ivory kept interfering and China got involved. Ivory attacked China after the finish and China no-sold and power slammed her. Venus clotheslined China's head off her body and laid out gun while Ivory pounded on China. Malenko beat Lita in a belt versus date match with the Cloverleaf. Malenko did a tremendous job of carrying Lita and playing to her strengths since it was the best Lita has looked in the ring probably ever. Undertaker spit tobacco juice on Vince's jacket. Ruining a jacket is a lot less expensive than ruining expensive cars and it probably meant more. Vince's deal the entire show was trying to talk everyone out of the Hell in the Cell match because of the dangers and he'd lose a drawing card if one got hurt. It was a pretty clever idea since the six-way is a tough draw and the gimmick of dangers of Hell in the Cell is a way to garner interest in what on paper is one of the weakest PPVs of the year. Regal regained the European title he lost in England, beating Crash Holly with the Regal stretch. Crowd didn't care but the work was solid. He then put Molly in the stretch after and Bob made the save, to set up Bob challenging Regal for the title on the pay-per-view. Molly did an injury angle. Main event wasn't a match, but simply Vince coming out and arguing with Foley, leading to Austin stunning him, Rock giving him the rock bottom and Taker giving him the last ride. Show ended with Taker, Rock and Austin all laid out backstage from an attack with pipes by Angle, Triple H and Rikishi. Sellout number 14 in a row in Madison Square Garden on December 5th for SmackDown and Heat tapings. Chris Chetty got a tryout match losing to Rios. Chetty got a decent reaction but the crowd turned on him after a missed spot. Benoit beat Blackman on Heat in a non-title. SmackDown opened with Foley telling Triple H and Rikishi they were suspended for the ending of Raw but didn't suspend Angle because he'd be wrestling Taker, Rock and Austin in a four-way for the title. Let's see, a heel booted out of the building doing a run-in for the main event. I think we've seen that script already. Ivory and Venus beat Gunn and China. Benoit put Gunn in the crossface and Venus pinned China. Vince came out in a wheelchair. Austin did an interview and Angle came out for a confrontation. Trish beat Molly via DQ for a garbage can lid shot. This set up a three-way with Trish, Molly and Ivory for the women's title on the pay-per-view. Bob Holly and Jericho beat Kane and Regal when Holly beat Regal with a choke. Jericho hit Kane with a chair afterwards. Foley and Vince argued, teasing a fight. Foley said if he were to come out of retirement, it would be for a match with Vince. Linda came out. Foley said that if anyone gets injured in the Hell in a Cell, then he will resign as commissioner. Vince then goes crazy after Linda backs up Foley and asks for a divorce. Linda starts crying as Vince tells her that she was never good enough for him and Linda leaves crying in the limo. Man, I wouldn't mess with that stuff. The last booker who booked an angle where he was splitting up marriages split up Steve McMichaels as well as his own. Quick and Dog beat ENC to get a title shot on pay-per-view when Edge accidentally speared Christian. ENC got a total face reaction and the crowd didn't like Quick and Dog. I'm not surprised by that in the least. RTC introduced the Dudleys as the new members of RTC. Dudleys turned on RTC during this skit. They put Richards through a table. Lita and Malenko wind up in the hotel room and the Hardys break a bottle over Malenko's head and destroy him. The four-way title match ended with no decision when Rikishi and Angle attacked the faces. The heels were cleaning house until Angle hit Rikishi with the title belt, and then Triple H laid out Angle with a chair shot. So Triple H was standing and everyone else was left laying. After the TV taping ended, Rock and Austin and Undertaker got up and all did their finishers on Angle and Rikishi and they celebrated drinking beer. Some notes from the East Rutherford, New Jersey non-Raw stuff. Chetty had his first tryout match, losing to Sho Funaki. They tried out some spots where one of the refs was doing a cartwheel and stuff. Rios needed help out of the ring after botching up a Hurricane Rana. Taka Michinoku made his WWF return after his shoulder injury, losing to Raven. Some SmackDown notes on the show that aired on November 30th. Hardys and Lita vs. Guerrero and Malenko and Saturn was the fast-paced action you'd expect with the Malenko-Lita teases. But there were a couple of badly botched spots. Guerrero seemed way off, and looked to have shaken himself up in the process, but he recovered well enough to do his frog splash finisher. Matt seemed to hurt his knee but still did a tope at the finish. Benoit and Jericho looked pretty much great in the tag match with Kane and Gunn as their respective partners. Gunn has not looked good at all since his return and it will speak volumes for Benoit if he can pull a good match out of him on the pay-per-view. For some reason I find Tiger Ali Singh and Lowdown as campy underneath comedy with the turbans. The Triple H/Stephanie anniversary stuff,
which had a nice payoff with Triple H accidentally laying out Vince by breaking a bottle over his head because he thought he was Austin, and Austin laughing about it, was way too long and got old. Like saying last week, I hope they recognize before it's too late what focusing on the same guys, even if they are great guys, for too long, does historically for a company and why wrestlers used to rotate, which is impossible nowadays, to keep the product fresh. Main with Undertaker and Rock vs. ENC and Angle was much better than expected and had superheat down the stretch. Because Rock is such a showman and it's easy to resent someone of such incredible popularity, he is often not given his due for being a simply amazing worker given his amount of time in the ring. He's not Ric Flair or Shawn Michaels, but neither were they 3 years into their career. Now Angle, that guy is on a totally different level. He's well ahead of Rock at the same stage of each's respective career, and in fact, he's probably ahead of just about anyone I've ever seen 2 years in, not just in the ring, but outside the ring as well. The training system can be credited to a degree, but you only get guys like that a few times a decade, and the WWF has been lucky enough to have them, and smart enough not to cut off their legs. Although I've never seen a better build-up for a storyline have a worse whatever it is we're at. Whether it's late midpoint or near conclusion, than the love triangle, which was entertaining early and is anything but that by this point, when they started rising like too many other companies do. I know they've never fully pulled the trigger with Angle even with the belt, but they didn't dwell on his inexperience as a way to keep him low on the card when his talent started becoming obvious. The Wall Street Journal did a major rip job on the WWF's lawsuit against the PTC, saying the entire lawsuit can be summed up with the following statement: we, WWF, deserve First Amendment rights, but they, PTC, don't. It talked about a speech that Dolores Tucker, not to be confused with the early 70s sports entertainment star of the same name, the president and founder of the National Political Congress of Black Women, made at the MCI WorldCom shareholders meeting this year, where she quoted the weekly Godfather catchphrase. The story, when giving word for word the pimping hoes nationwide, rolled a fatty for this pimp daddy speech and said, most of us can see how this kind of thing would bring in the teenage boys on Thursday night. Likewise, most would see why it's also the kind of thing Mr. McMahon is not too eager to have Mr. Bozell and the PTC bring before the WWF's corporate advertisers. In short, the WWF is arguing that the same First Amendment that gives them the right to air this trash somehow ought not to apply to those who find it offensive. The Wall Street Journal concluded that, if we are to believe the complaint Mr. McMahon has just filed in a U.S. District Court, both sides agree on only one thing: the PTC effort is working. However, given that the lawsuit, which shouldn't be confused with trying to win a case in court as much as a way to discredit the PTC and shut them up to avoid losing future sponsors, the result thus far for the WWF has also been successful, no matter what you think of the validity of the arguments themselves. As we've noted in almost all complicated matters regarding pro wrestling, it's much easier to worry about who is the knee-jerk winner and loser than actually tackle issues themselves that aren't so black and white. Although the November 25th show in Chicago actually came about 800 tickets shy of capacity, it didn't stop WWF in hyping the January 16th SmackDown taping at the Allstate Arena from announcing the show as the 15th consecutive sellout in the building, and that the next show they would be going for number 16 on the local syndicated show this weekend. Sean Waltman, ex-Pac, who was out for a few more weeks with a neck injury, pleaded no contest to a disorderly conduct charge and was fined $178 in an incident from July 4, 1999. According to reports on the incident, Elias Urbana asked Waltman for an autograph as Waltman and his family were getting off a ride at a waterslide park. Waltman apparently walked past him without stopping, and Urbana slapped him in the chest and said, "Do you think you are too good for me because you are making the big money?" Waltman then allegedly punched Urbana in the face. Waltman's attorney claimed that Urbana caused the fight and that Waltman never wanted to be a celebrity and is not the character he portrays on television. Austin and Deborah appeared on tape on the December 2nd PPW show in Memphis. Lawler and Deborah did a video to build up a match with Lawler and Kat vs. Slash, formerly Wolfie D, and Victoria, real name Lisa Marie Varon of The Godfather's Hose, as the TV main event. Lawler did a video with Austin where Austin teased getting mad at Lawler for using the stunner in Memphis. Austin told a story that when he started out working in Memphis and needed money for gas because he lost his wallet, he asked Dundee for some money and Dundee said he couldn't loan him any money because he was a little short. Jason Sensation appeared on the show doing color commentary as Shawn Michaels. Some Ross Report notes for the week. WrestleMania at the Astrodome on April 1st. Advance as of the weekend was 52,557 tickets sold for $3,003,870, making it the first show in U.S. history ever to top the $3 million mark.
Actually, it was the first show ever to top the $2 million mark in the US. When all is said and done, the gate should fall shy of the all-time WWF record of $3.45 million set at the 1990 WrestleMania at the Skydome in Toronto for Hogan vs. Warrior.
On the December 10 New York Times bestseller list, Mick Foley's Christmas book should be number 4 among children's books, and Jim Ross' Can You Stand the Heat should be number 6 among self-help books.
Eric Angle has reached a verbal agreement to go full-time into pro wrestling and will be starting in OVW shortly. WWF has released Tracy Smothers, Glenn Ruth, Headbanger Thrasher, and Cindy Lynch, Bobcat, who were all working in the Memphis circuit.
Smothers was the trainer for the circuit. Ross is negotiating contract extensions for both Jackie and Snow, both of whom have contracts that expire in mid-2001.
Rock turned down a stint on Celebrity Jeopardy.
Dave Bautista, Leviathan in OVW, and Ron Killings, K-Quick, have signed new multi-year contracts. They are expecting to send some developmental talent to the IWA in Puerto Rico early next year.
WWF had pulled all its talent from Victor Quiñones' circuit in the past few months and had only sent a few big names for his major shows. The December 17th house show in Raleigh has been moved to February 2nd in order to give the wrestlers more time off leading to Christmas. X-Pac is expected to be repackaged as a babyface when he returns.
Apparently both Dick Enberg and Bob Costas, who are NBC's biggest name sportscasters, have refused to work the XFL games. Costas has been a major critic of McMahon because of the content issue of wrestling for the past few years and pulled out of doing the 1991 WrestleMania show he had agreed to do due to its exploiting the Persian Gulf War in its main event angle.
Ross claimed the WWF has no interest in Torrie Wilson.
He said he and Lawler were both interested in doing XFL games on TNN, but felt it was a long shot. Matt Vasgersian, who will handle the main games on NBC as play-by-play man with Jesse Ventura on Saturday nights, made a comment about not wanting to work with a Lawler type. Ross talked about the rumors of Chyna being in a lead role in Terminator 3, which were rumored for one day during the week as part of the daily rumor of the female lead in the movie.
Ross commented on the New York Post article and the comments by Bret Hart, praising him as a performer and using the Survivor Series defense for Hart's comments about the steroids and painkillers problem in the business. What a wonderful all-encompassing defense that is, because you can use it on anything, no matter how true or not true the points may be. Mad Magazine did a spoof in its 400th issue where they do betting odds on the cause of death of a major celebrity, doing it on Vince McMahon. Causes of death: killed by flying splinters while standing too close to the Spanish announcer's table 1-1, VD contracted from one of D'Lo Brown's Ho escorts, well, there is no more Godfather, 5-1, terminal creeps upon accidentally catching a glimpse of Rikishi naked 7-1, brain explodes from trying to keep all the WWF storylines straight 10-1, gets drunk, slips and hits head during XFL party to celebrate putting the NFL out of business 5,400,000,000-1, stroke from tireless efforts to ensure that regular telecasts are not just commercials for pay-per-view events 8,300,000-1, exhaustion from making sure that every wrestler gets their equal share of WWF profits 1,000,000,000,000-1. Dynamite Kid talked on his website about being backstage at the Rebellion pay-per-view, saying he had a great time with Vince McMahon, Pat Patterson, Gerald Briscoe and the Heckner brothers, none of whom he had seen since he quit the company in late 1988. He said it was also good to see people he knew like Benoit, Guerrero, Rikishi, Foley, and Malenko, who he also hadn't seen in many years, as well as meet for the first time people like Jericho, Rock, Hardys, Edge, Christian and the Dudleys. His last statement about what he told the wrestlers was probably the most telling. I told them all to keep doing what they were doing and take care of themselves. But they probably won't. Because when I was wrestling, neither did I. Media Week ran a story on December 4th regarding the XFL's lack of success in getting major corporate ads, putting the blame on Vince McMahon. The article gave Basil DeVito, who is heading the league, the advice muzzle your boss, saying that McMahon's public statements about the league are keeping advertisers away from the product. Dan Rank, who handles buys for such biggies as Pepsi, Visa, General Electric and Frito-Lay, said that McMahon's public comments have scared us away. Our concern is content. They've got to put a muzzle on him. He's hurting their efforts to sell. Rank said he is taking a wait-and-see attitude, which is largely the current high-profile advertiser opinion on the league. The comment in ESPN magazine, with McMahon saying they would encourage the cheerleaders to date players and that they'd ask the cheerleaders what they were doing after a player they were dating blew a play, was the specific statement people are pointing to. When that statement got such a negative reaction, McMahon claimed he meant it as a joke. Jeff Shapes, an XFL spokesman to avert the backlash, said, "We're not going to encourage dating among cheerleaders and players, but if it happens, it happens." But the man was making a joke. XFL has about 50% of its ad inventory sold, and there are big names, including many of the companies that have pulled out of WWF SmackDown and are involved with the product. The current sales pitch is that the league will average an 11.0 rating per week, a 5.5 on Saturday night on NBC is the latest projection, and selling spots for $150,000 per 30, which would buy 3 spots, one on UPN, one on TNN, and one on NBC.
There is also controversy because the XFL has pushed their strongest appeal as ages 12 to 24 males in its literature, but then Anheuser-Busch signed on. Now ad buyers are being told the shows will skew strongest among males 18 to 34. It is speculated that the Anheuser-Busch contract may have a clause that if the audience under 21 is too high of a percentage, they can bail out. Parties will be working the UPW December 20th show in Santa Ana, California, which will have a live webcast and will also include Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera. In the latest Sports Rec video charts, it was total pro wrestling domination, with the first 12 and 16 of the top 20 being pro wrestling videos. WWF had the top 4 spots with Rock, People's Champ, Tables, Ladders and Chairs, Eve of Destruction, and Divas Postcards from the Caribbean. ECW Evolution, the just released tape, censored, came in at number 5 and uncensored at number 8. The reason the censored tapes are outselling the uncensored is more because many outlets like Walmart won't carry the uncensored version. The FMW King of the Deathmatch tape held strong at number 7, while ICP's Juggalo Wrestling was number 10 and XPW's Extreme Wrestling was number 17. In the UK, Raw drew 420,000 viewers and Nitro drew 110,000 viewers. SmackDown tapings on November 28th at the Target Center in Minneapolis drew a sellout 12,193, paying $374,600. Raw tapings on December 4th at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey drew a sellout 14,446, paying $424,141. Because of the England pay-per-view show, there were no regular house shows over the weekend. Merchandise at the 2 tapings totaled $196,648, which was $7.38 per head. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine.